undercover boss orders hot dog at his own joint, and what the chef whispers will haunt him. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The gray cap sat low over his eyes as he pushed through the diner door. To anyone watching, he was just another tired man grabbing a hot dog and a cup of coffee on a late morning. The smell of fried onions hung in the air, ketchup and mustard bottles lined the counter, and the red tile walls carried a hum of everyday routine. He didn't belong here, not as an owner, not as the man who built the chain, but today, that was the point. He needed to see it through a stranger's eyes. The cook leaned closer, sliding the plate across the counter. His voice was low, almost a whisper, meant for no one but the man in the gray cap. "The ones who serve don't get the tips," he said. "They all end up with the manager's nephew." Then he straightened and went back to wiping the counter, as if he had said nothing unusual at all. It landed like a stone in still water. The words weren't shouted. They weren't even bitter. They were casual, as though corruption had become routine, as if unfairness had lived so long in these walls it no longer raised questions. The gray-capped man sipped his coffee slowly, but his mind was already racing. This wasn't just a complaint. It was a fracture, the kind of quiet crack that could bring down an entire system. Outside, drizzle blurred the window panes, streaking the neon sign that still hummed open 24 hours. A silver pickup truck in the lot might have looked ordinary, but its driver was anything but. Jackson Reeves, 52, founder and CEO of the Sunrise joint chain, sat here disguised as a man with nothing but time to waste. The toast from a gas station bag lay untouched in the truck. He hadn't come for food. He had come for the truth. He kept his posture casual, leaning an elbow on the counter. The cook's whisper replayed in his mind. A nephew, a funneling of tips, a system designed for fairness but twisted into favoritism. He glanced down the counter. A young waitress set plates with practiced care, her apron faded, her smile polite but dimmed. She moved faster than the others, covering more tables, refilling mugs before customers even asked. Yet she never approached the register. She didn't swipe a card, didn't touch the screen. The terminal belonged to someone else. Jackson took another slow sip, eyes tracing the rhythm of the room. The nephew's slick hair, perfect uniform stood guard over the POS like it was his private kingdom. Every tip passed through his fingers. Every digital payment vanished behind his login. Around them, customers laughed, oblivious, mustard smeared on buns, sodas fizzing in paper cups. To them, this was just another stop in the day. But Jackson knew better. He had seen this pattern before. Manipulation disguised as structure. Theft wearing the mask of normal procedure. The coffee cooled in his cup, but the heat in his chest spread. This wasn't going to be written off as a glitch or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, and in the quiet corner of a hot dog joint he had built from the ground up, Jackson Reeves understood. An investigation had just begun. The coffee in his cup had lost its warmth, but he barely noticed. His eyes stayed on the rhythm of the room, the scrape of plates, the hiss of the grill, the shuffle of shoes across worn tile. What mattered wasn't the food. It was the silence underneath it all, the way everyone moved like they were rehearsing old steps instead of living new ones. Survival, not pride. Jackson adjusted the brim of his gray cap and let his gaze settle on the young waitress again. She moved like she had been carrying this place on her back for years, refilling mugs without being asked, sliding plates with precision, smiling just enough to hide how tired she was. Yet no one seemed to notice. The other two employees lingered near the POS terminal, polished uniforms, easy posture, doing little more than tapping screens and waiting for payments. It didn't add up. He had built this chain with one rule about tips: fairness. Every role was supposed to be transparent, every share equal. That system was designed to prevent exactly what he was seeing now: favoritism, siphoning, invisible hierarchies inside a process meant to be level. The waitress passed by his stool again, setting down another plate for a customer 2 seats over. Jackson leaned slightly, keeping his tone casual, like a man making small talk over lunch. "Busy shift," he said softly. "Guess the tips aren't bad at this hour." She froze, not her hands, Not her smile, but her eyes. Just a flicker, the kind of pause that lasts less than a heartbeat, yet tells the truth. "Morning shifts are the worst," she said, "especially when we split them. Only a few actually get anything." The words landed flat, matter of fact, like she wasn't even complaining, just stating a reality. But inside Jackson, it hit harder than the cook's whisper. He leaned back slowly, taking another sip of coffee, though the bitterness no longer came from the cup. It came from what she had just admitted. When she circled back to clear plates, he asked in the same low voice, "Why don't you run payments yourself?" She didn't stop moving, didn't even look at him, just leaned in closer to collect a fork. "I don't have access," she murmured. "Pose only lets certain roles swipe. If your name isn't on the list, you don't get digital tips either." His jaw tightened. Who decides that? Her glance shifted quickly toward the counter where the manager stood, laughing with a customer, perfectly pressed shirt, pen clipped neatly in his pocket. She didn't need to say more, but she did. "Brad." He sets up the rolls. Then, with the faintest nod toward the POS, she added, "That's his nephew. Always has access. Always gets the morning shifts." Jackson didn't respond. He didn't need to. Every detail fit too perfectly. The system wasn't broken by accident. It was being bent, deliberately, into something it was never meant to be. The waitress surprised him then. From the pocket of her apron, she pulled out a thin notebook, its edges curled, its cover bent. She placed it on the counter, almost like passing a secret. "I just needed to know I wasn't crazy," she whispered, "so I started writing it down." He opened it carefully. Page after page, she had logged dates, table numbers, bill totals, the POS tips displayed, and what she actually received. Red pens circled the gaps, margins filled with quick notes and timestamps. It wasn't an accusation. It was evidence organized, undeniable. Her voice lowered further. "I've lost more than $600 in the last month, but what hurts more is no one ever asked. Not once." Jackson closed the notebook gently, not with finality, but with reverence. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Inside him, something shifted. A restaurant could recover from slow sales. It could even weather a bad review. But when the people holding it together started believing the system didn't see them anymore, that was fatal. The bell above the diner door jingled faintly as a new customer walked in, but Jackson barely noticed. His focus stayed on the small notebook resting under his hand, and on the quiet truth it carried. This wasn't just about missing money. This was about a culture that had been rewritten in silence, reshaped to benefit a few while the rest worked invisible. He lifted his coffee again, though it had gone completely cold. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. Somewhere inside this hot dog joint, someone had decided the rules didn't matter, and that was about to change. Jackson stayed in the corner booth longer than he needed to. The notebook still rested under his hand, its bent cover pressed flat against the table. He didn't flip through the pages again. He didn't have to. Every entry matched what he'd just seen with his own eyes, the waitress hustling across the floor, the nephew glued to the POS, the manager pretending not to notice. Instincts weren't enough for a CEO, but instincts plus data, that was the beginning of a case. When she stepped away to grab another tray, Jackson slid his phone from his pocket. He angled it low, hidden by the brim of his gray cap, and snapped photos of each page, line by line. Every date, every total, every red circle she had drawn. Then he pulled out an old pen and a folded sticky note, scrawling a single line in block letters. "Keep documenting, but don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return." He tucked the note inside the notebook, nudged his coffee cup closer to conceal the gesture, and leaned back just as she returned. At the counter, Brad, the manager, had disappeared into the back office. His absence didn't calm the room. If anything, it made Jackson more aware of the nephew's presence at the POS. Tyler, young, slick hair, neat shirt, stood there with the ease of someone who knew too much about the system. Jackson watched him lean slightly forward, tapping through screens with a rhythm that didn't belong to a part-time server. For a brief moment, Jackson caught the screen's reflection. User role settings, advanced access, username Tyler C. His grip tightened around the coffee cup. This wasn't just favoritism, this was structural manipulation. Roles were being reassigned under the surface, visibility stripped away, the system deliberately bent so one account could control the flow of money. Nearby, a new employee struggled with her tray, fumbling as she tried to adjust an order for table 5. Nervous, unsure, she hovered near the counter. Cassie, the waitress who had given Jackson the notebook, slipped beside her without hesitation. She crouched, whispered directions, showing her how to flag allergy info, how to correct the ticket. Then, in a low voice only inches away, she added, "Don't let Tyler help you. He'll never do it for you." Jackson heard it clearly, and in that moment he understood Cassie wasn't just keeping this place alive with her work. She was holding its moral center together in silence, making sure the cracks didn't widen too fast. Without her, the floor would have collapsed already. Minutes later, Chase, another server, tapped the POS and frowned. "That's weird. I could log in yesterday. Today it says restricted." Tyler didn't even look up. He smirked slightly. "Probably just a glitch. I'll take care of it." To anyone else, it sounded routine. But to Jackson, it was the final confirmation. This wasn't a glitch. This was a cover. Create custom sub-roles, limit access, redirect digital tips. If you were clever, it didn't look like theft. It looked like configuration. Jackson set down the cold coffee and stood. He left a couple of bills on the counter, not for the food, but for the silence he had borrowed. As he stepped into the drizzle outside, the neon hum of open 24 hours followed him. He didn't look back at the diner. He didn't need to. 93 seconds. That was the length of the call. His voice was low but steady when Mara answered. "We have a problem," he said. "The POS system is being manipulated. I need you to go in quiet, line by line. Every role assignment, every tip account." Mara Lynn had been with Sunrise for 7 years, head of internal investigations. 3 embezzlement rings dismantled in 4. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. "Understood," she said. By the time Jackson's truck pulled onto the freeway, the order had already gone through. Within the hour, the POS terminal at Branch 28 would be switched into silent audit mode. Nothing on the surface would change. Orders would still ring up, tips would still process, the nephew would still lean against the counter. But underneath, every transaction, every role change, every override would now be logged. The diner looked ordinary from the outside, steam curling from its vents into the gray morning air. But inside, without knowing it, the people who thought they had rewritten the rules were about to be caught by their own system. And Jackson Reeves, the man in the gray cap, had just set the trap. The findings came in before sunrise the next morning. Jackson was already awake, sitting at his kitchen table with the same gray cap resting beside his phone when Mara's message buzzed through. Silent audit mode had been running for less than 24 hours, but it was enough to expose what had been buried. Finding number 1. The system had been modified with a hidden access tier. It wasn't visible on the staff screen, but in the back end it carried a label preferred internal. That tier had been applied to 3 accounts: Brad Coleman, the branch manager, Tyler C., the part-time nephew, and one listed as kitchen support, 03. Finding number 2. In the last 30 days, digital tip totals had reached $4,800. Of that, 67% had been routed directly through Tyler's account, even though his table service volume measured less than 15% of total tickets. Finding number 3. Payroll listed a part-time kitchen worker named Marcus Hill, clocked in 21 mornings out of the last 25. But HR had no file for him, no tax forms, no ID. The social security number attached to his record had already been flagged as a duplicate in another branch 2 years earlier. The manager at that branch? Brad Coleman. The 4th detail came from finance. A shell company called Douglas Henderson LLC had been receiving weekly transfers every Friday. The amounts matched the tip differentials to the dollar. On paper, it looked like a service fee for staffing logistics. But the email tied to the LLC's registration belonged to Brad. Jackson leaned back in his chair, letting the facts settle. This wasn't sloppy. It was structured. A system within a system, designed to move money quietly while everyone else stayed too busy or too afraid to question it. He picked up the gray cap, turned it once in his hands, and set it down again. He had seen enough. That afternoon, he drove back to Branch 28. The drizzle had lifted, the sky a flat, overcast gray that matched the brim of his cap. From the outside, the diner looked the same: red brick walls, neon buzzing faintly, the smell of hot dogs and onions drifting out to the lot. But Jackson wasn't here as a stranger anymore. He walked in with purpose, no disguise, no hesitation. The staff froze when he stepped through the door. Some recognized him instantly. Others only felt the change in the air. Cassie paused mid-pour, the coffee pot trembling just slightly before she steadied it. Tyler stiffened behind the register. Brad emerged from the office, expression smooth, the kind of smile that had fooled plenty before. Jackson placed a folder on the counter. Inside were printouts, roll assignments, tip funnels, payroll anomalies, the fake shell company. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I didn't build Sunrise so families could hand each other power behind closed doors," he said evenly. Silence stretched across the diner. Every eye turned toward Brad. The confidence in his face faltered, just a flicker, before he tried to recover. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, but the words fell flat. Jackson slid another sheet across the counter, the LLC registration with Brad's old email stamped at the bottom. Cassie stood a few feet away, notebook clutched against her apron. She didn't speak, but her presence was its own testimony. Jackson nodded toward her gently. "She kept records when no one else would, and because of that, we have proof." "Oh." Brad's mouth opened again, but no defense came out. The nephew shifted uncomfortably, suddenly smaller behind the terminal that had given him false authority. Jackson's voice carried through the room, calm, steady, impossible to ignore. "Effective immediately, Brad Coleman is suspended. Corporate will complete the termination process by end of day. Tyler C. is barred from POS access across all branches. Payroll and HR will reset role assignments before the next shift." No one moved. The only sound was the soft drip of coffee into a waiting cup. Then, slowly, relief began to ripple across the faces of the staff. Cassie lowered her notebook, her shoulders easing for the first time all morning. Jackson turned, scanning the room, not for applause but for confirmation that they understood. Fairness wasn't a gift, it was the ground they stood on, and when someone tried to dig beneath it, the whole place shook. He left the folder on the counter, the evidence visible for anyone to see. As he reached for the door, he spoke once more, his tone the same as when he'd first walked in, disguised, steady, grounded, undeniable. "This place will run fair, or it won't run at all." The bell above the door jingled faintly as he stepped into the gray afternoon, leaving behind a diner forever changed. Brad never came back to the counter that day. The silence after Jackson's words hung heavier than the smell of grease in the air. Staff drifted toward Cassie, not openly but with glances that said everything. For the first time in weeks, she didn't look invisible. She looked seen. Corporate moved quickly. By the next morning, Mara's team had already flagged every transaction, every role change, every hidden override that Brad had authorized. The audit stretched beyond Branch 28, uncovering similar patterns in 2 other locations he had supervised in the past. The network of fraud unraveled faster than he probably imagined. But inside the diner itself, the change felt immediate. When Jackson returned 3 days later, not in disguise, not with folders or files, just as himself, he noticed it the second he walked through the door. The neon still flickered. The tile floor was still scuffed. The booth still sagged at the edges. Yet the energy was different. Cassie was training a new hire at the counter, showing her how to log orders properly, how to check modifiers before sending tickets through. She wasn't doing it hurriedly or under her breath this time. She was instructing with confidence. Her notebook now replaced by a laminated guide provided directly from corporate. The transparency she had begged for was no longer just a hope, it was the system. Jackson sat at the same corner booth he had chosen before. The gray cap was gone, resting instead on the passenger seat of his truck. He didn't need it anymore. From where he sat, he could see every register now displayed real-time tips on the screen, visible to every server assigned to that shift. No hidden roles, no invisible accounts. The fairness that had once lived only in his design documents was alive in practice. Cassie approached with a fresh cup of coffee. She set it down gently, the way she always did, but this time her smile wasn't forced. "Black, right?" she asked. "Always," Jackson replied, his voice soft. Then he nodded toward the register. "How's it working?" She followed his gaze, her expression shifting into something almost like disbelief. "We can all see it now, every table, every split. It's different. Feels like the place finally remembers us." Jackson didn't answer right away. He sipped the coffee, still hot this time, and let her words settle. That was what mattered, not the spreadsheets, not the quarterly reports. It was whether the people inside the system believed it saw them. At the far end of the counter, the new trainee laughed nervously as she fumbled with a stack of trays. Cassie was already on her way over, steadying the pile, giving clear instructions. Jackson watched her for a moment, then spoke quietly, almost to himself. Some of the most overlooked roles are the ones that hold everything together. He stayed for nearly an hour, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to see the shift run under its new rhythm. Customers came and went, bills settled, tips split in real time. There were no whispers this time, no glances over shoulders, no uneasy silences. The fraud was gone, but more importantly, the fear was gone too. As he stood to leave, Cassie returned to the booth. "Thank you," she said simply, notebook still tucked in her apron pocket out of habit. Jackson shook his head. "Don't thank me. You did the hard part. You kept the truth alive when no one else would." She looked down for a second, then met his eyes. "It feels like maybe it mattered." "It did," Jackson said. He slid a business card across the table. "Not for show, just for connection. I want you on the training team. We need people who don't just do the job, but protect the integrity of it." "Oh." Her hand trembled slightly as she took it. Not from fear, but from the weight of being recognized after so long unseen. Jackson left the diner quietly, stepping into the cool afternoon air. He didn't look back. The system was working again, and the people who deserved to be heard finally had a voice. As he walked across the lot, the neon hum followed him one last time. The sign still glowed, open 24 hours, but for Jackson Reeves, the message carried a different meaning now. Fairness wasn't just a policy, it had to stay open, always, every hour of every day. And as long as he wore the title of CEO, he would make sure it did. Jackson didn't drive straight back to headquarters after that visit. Instead, he pulled onto the shoulder of the highway and sat for a while, the hum of passing trucks rattling the mirrors. The gray cap rested on the passenger seat, its brim bent slightly from use. He picked it up, turned it in his hands, and thought about how a simple disguise had shown him truths no dashboard ever had. His phone buzzed again, Mara. The audit had gone deeper overnight. Not just Brad, not just Branch 28. The hidden access tier had been replicated in 6 other locations. Different names, different logins, but the same pattern. Preferred internal, unauthorized overrides, skimmed tips feeding into outside accounts. Jackson felt the weight of it settle. What began as one whisper in a hot dog joint had unraveled into a network, an infection spreading through places he once thought untouchable. Numbers on a screen couldn't capture the quiet damage, employees carrying resentment, customers unknowingly feeding a broken system, culture rotting from the inside. He answered the call. "Line them up," he said. His tone was calm but firm. "Every branch, every role. I want full visibility, no shadows." "Mara didn't hesitate." "Already moving," she replied. That evening, Jackson returned home, but he couldn't bring himself to rest. He laid the audit reports across his desk, page after page, each one a mirror of what he had seen at Branch 28. The same siphoning, the same misuse of access. Different managers, same negligence. The scale was larger, but the mechanism was identical. Someone had found a flaw in the design and exploited it. He stared out the window at the city lights and remembered something he told his first group of managers a decade earlier. If you want to know if a restaurant is healthy, don't look at revenue. Watch how the staff pours coffee at 7 a.m. The numbers on these sheets told one story, but the notebook Cassie had handed him told another, the story of someone who refused to let silence win. The next morning, Jackson walked into headquarters not as a distant executive, but as a man with a mission. He gathered his senior team, laid the evidence across the table, and said only one thing. "This isn't just about tips, this is about trust. If they don't believe the system sees them, we lose everything." For hours, they dissected the fraud, traced transactions, reviewed permissions. IT engineers mapped every unauthorized access. Finance tracked every suspicious payout. HR cross-checked every false name, every ghost employee like Marcus Hill. By midday, the full picture was clear. The rot wasn't isolated. It had been spreading quietly for years. Jackson listened, asked questions, but mostly let the weight of the evidence speak. Finally, he leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "We built Sunrise to be a place where people mattered more than margins. Somewhere along the way, we forgot to protect that. That ends today." His team nodded, but he could see the unease in their eyes. They knew the fallout would be messy terminations, lawsuits, headlines. But Jackson wasn't thinking about the headlines. He was thinking about Cassie, about the tremor in her voice when she said, "No one ever asked." Later that evening, he drafted a company-wide memo. Not polished PR, not corporate spin, just a simple statement of truth. We discovered manipulation in our tipping system. It betrayed our values, and it hurt the very people who keep us alive. We are fixing it branch by branch, role by role. Transparency is not optional. It is who we are. And if you see something that feels wrong, speak. You will be heard. He read it twice, then hit send. The message rippled out, hitting inboxes across the country. Some employees read it with skepticism, others with relief. But for the first time in a long while, they had a direct line from the top, a voice promising not perfection, but fairness. Jackson leaned back in his chair, exhausted, but resolute. The fight wasn't over. The audits would take weeks. The cleanup might take months. But the silence had been broken. And in that silence's place, something stronger was beginning to grow. He reached for the gray cap one more time, setting it on the edge of his desk. It wasn't just a disguise anymore. It was a reminder sometimes the only way to see the truth of your empire is to sit quietly in a corner booth and listen. The rollout of the audit had only been live for a week, but the results were already undeniable. Branch after branch revealed the same pattern: tip percentages skewed, ghost staff clocked in, payments routed to shell entities. Jackson read each report late into the night, the gray cap sitting on his desk like a silent witness. What had started with one hot dog and a whisper was now a map of systemic abuse. By Thursday morning, his inbox carried the summary from Mara. 17 branches impacted, 4 managers directly implicated, 3 shell companies traced. The list wasn't just names, it was stories. Each number represented staff who had been told, without words, that they didn't matter. Jackson didn't wait. He booked a string of site visits, this time not undercover. The point now wasn't to catch whispers, it was to show presence. When he walked into branch 31, heads lifted. Some employees froze mid-step, others dropped their gaze, unsure of what his arrival meant. He went straight to the register, tapped the screen, and pulled up the new transparent tips log. "Everyone sees this now?" he asked. A young server nodded. Her shoulders eased as she answered, "Yes, sir. Every split. Right there. No more hiding." He watched her expression carefully, the cautious relief spreading across her face. That was the measure of progress when people believed what they saw with their own eyes, not what managers told them. Later that afternoon, back at headquarters, the leadership team gathered around a long table. The air was tense. Some executives looked worried about lawsuits, others about investor reactions. Jackson didn't let them spiral. He laid down the audit reports, one after another, the evidence undeniable. "This isn't about PR," he said. "This is about trust. We failed to protect the ground our people stand on. We rebuild it, or we lose everything." The room was quiet. Finally, one VP asked, "How far are we taking this?" Jackson didn't blink. "All the way. Every branch, every role, every account. If fairness isn't visible, then it isn't real." That night, alone in his office, he drafted the second memo to staff. Transparency is not optional. If you feel unseen, tell us. If you see manipulation, report it. This company belongs to those who keep it alive, not those who exploit it. He hit send, then leaned back, staring at the skyline. The neon outside reminded him of the diner sign that had started it all, open 24 hours. Except now, the words carried a different weight. Fairness had to stay open too. Every hour, every branch. Jackson reached for the gray cap, turning it in his hands. It wasn't just part of a disguise anymore. It was a reminder that leadership didn't come from being recognized. It came from listening when no one else would. And he knew, with absolute certainty, the fight wasn't close to over. The storm inside Sunrise kept unfolding. But in the branches themselves, a different kind of calm was beginning to take hold. The new POS update had gone live across the region, every role visible, every tip split shown in real time. Staff, who once whispered about unfairness, now checked the screens openly. For the first time, they knew exactly where their money was going. Jackson visited another location late that week. The diner smelled of fresh buns and onions sizzling on the grill, the same ordinary scene that had always played out. But the atmosphere was different. Servers greeted him without hesitation. A young trainee even smiled nervously and said, "It feels lighter in here now." He ordered nothing this time, just walked the floor, watching how people moved. No sidelong glances at the POS. No hushed warnings. Just work being done, openly, without fear. It wasn't perfect. Trust takes longer to heal than a system does to fix, but it was a start. Back at headquarters, Mara handed him the final audit package. 3 managers formally terminated, 2 others under review. The shell companies frozen, accounts under legal hold. On paper, the problem was being dismantled, but Jackson knew the real test wasn't in the numbers. It was in whether employees like Cassie believed they could finally stop documenting wrongs in secret notebooks. That night, he returned to Branch 28 one last time. Cassie was there, training 2 new hires at the counter. She caught sight of him and offered a small, steady smile. Her notebook was gone now, replaced by a laminated training guide. She had moved from survival to leadership. Jackson nodded, not making a scene, just letting the acknowledgement pass quietly between them. Sometimes recognition didn't need applause, it just needed to be real. As he left, the neon above the door buzzed softly, the same 3 words glowing against the night. Open 24 hours. Jackson paused for a moment, watching the light flicker, then stepped into the dark. The system wasn't just open for business anymore, it was open for fairness. And that, he thought, was the only way it could survive. Jackson drove home with the highway stretching out before him, the dashboard glowing faintly in the dark. The gray cap rested on the passenger seat, no longer a disguise but a reminder. What had started as a quiet meal in a corner booth, a hot dog, a cup of coffee, a whispered truth had grown into a reckoning that touched every corner of his company. At headquarters the next morning, he stood before his leadership team once more. The audits were complete, the reports were final, the fraud had been traced, the roles reset, the shell companies exposed. But Jackson knew numbers alone weren't the story. He looked at his team and said, "We didn't just uncover theft, we uncovered silence. And silence can be deadlier than fraud. It kills trust before money ever disappears." The room stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of recognition. They understood. Later that week, Jackson recorded a message for every Sunrise employee. He didn't sit behind a polished desk or read from a corporate script. He stood in a plain diner, neon buzzing behind him, the same kind of place where it had all begun. His voice was steady, his words direct. "Some of you have been carrying weight this company. Never should have asked you to carry. You worked harder than anyone else, but you weren't seen. That ends now. Transparency is permanent. Fairness is not a privilege, it is the foundation. And if you ever feel invisible, speak. You will be heard." The video was short, but when it reached inboxes and phones across the country, the reaction was immediate. Staff shared it in group chats. Trainees played it on their breaks. For once, the CEO's voice didn't sound distant. It sounded like someone who had been there, who had sat in the same booth, who had listened. Back at Branch 28, Cassie finished another shift. She hung up her apron and tucked away the laminated training guide she now carried instead of her notebook. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to record every unfair moment. The system itself had become the record. Outside, Jackson visited quietly. No cameras, no crowd. He caught her eye as she stepped through the door. She didn't thank him. She didn't have to. Her nod was enough. He turned away, stepping into the evening air. The neon sign glowed above them. Open 24 hours. To most, it meant hot dogs and coffee at any hour. To Jackson, it meant something else. Fairness had no closing time. It had to remain open, every shift, every table, every day. As he walked back to his truck, he left the gray cap on the counter inside. It wasn't needed anymore. His disguise had done its job. The truth had been uncovered. And for the first time in weeks, Jackson Reeves felt certain of one thing. His company could survive lost dollars, but it could never survive lost dignity. Integrity wasn't the end of the story, it was the only story worth telling.